Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings on Fridays. And my name is Don K. Preston. I am the founder of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. But we've been talking about the man of sin. There have just been tons and tons of people posting on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, claiming, and I saw one just this week that said, 5 major proofs that Donald Trump is the man of sin. And I was just like, oh, my goodness. And one of them is that he has brokered peace in the Middle East. That's supposed to prove that Donald Trump is the man of sin? This is grasping at straws. So this is going to be my last video on the man of sin, unless something else comes up that I need to pay particular attention to, or that if you would like me to address another aspect of the doctrine of the man of sin, then send me an email, contact me and say, Don, I'd really like for you to address the following issue as it relates to the man of sin. And I'll be glad to do that. I want to provide as much good, solid, biblical testimony and evidence to equip you to answer all of the, may I use the term, paranoia, the fear-mongering. Because after all, everybody who's saying, well, Donald Trump is the man of sin, folks, that demands, absolutely demands, that the rapture has to occur in this generation, before Donald Trump passes away. And, he's in his 80s, so he doesn't have a whole lot of time left. Just think about this. I mean, if you're going to affirm that Donald Trump is the man of sin, then since he's in his, low 80s? I don't even know how old he is. I think he's 82, 83, somewhere along in there. Well, guess what? His lifespan is very limited, so if he's the man of sin, guess what? The rapture has to occur. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We already know what happened to all of the false predictions about the rapture supposed to have occurred September 23rd, 24th, 2025. Well, then they, quote, recalculated and said, well, yeah, it was actually, the true date is October 23rd and 24th. Well, let me see here. This is October the 31st, isn't it? Well, as the song said a long time ago, good rock song, another one bites the dust when it comes to these false prophecies and false prophets. So just think about this from that perspective. Let me reiterate. If Donald Trump is the man of sin, how many more years could he possibly live? He's already in his 80s. He's not going to live another 50 years. Chances are real good he's not going to live another 20 years. It's kind of like me. I'm turning 76 the last day of this year, December 31st, 2025. I don't have an awful lot more time to live. Now, if I know that turning 76, if I know that I don't have probably, the statistics are against it, I'm not going to live for another 20 years. That means statistically, Donald Trump is not going to live another 20 years. So the window of opportunity for Donald Trump to be the man of sin is very, very narrow. Well, all of the people who down through the years have identified, Richard Nixon, Barack Obama, any number, Hitler, Mussolini, all of those people, we were told, the man of sin. And guess what? They were wrong. Folks, I want to suggest to you, it is time for the church at large, to use that term in its broadest sense. It is time for people to wake up. And there are certain facts that we can know about the biblical doctrine of the man of sin that absolutely refutes, falsifies, and just outright proves to be false the modern doctrine of the man of sin and the rapture and the second coming. Here's something you've got to know. I'm going to make this relatively fast this morning, or short. I'm not going to make this a 1 hour presentation, okay? You have to understand the presuppositions that underlie the modern doctrine of dispensationalism, the modern doctrine of the man of sin and the rapture. They're just certain presuppositions. Now, it has been said, if you grant a person their presupposition, they can prove anything. And that's basically true. So, what are the presuppositions that the dispensational world, those who constantly tell us the man of sin is alive, who constantly tell us we're waiting for the rapture and it will be during Rosh Hashanah and it will be real soon. Assumption number one is that you and I today, we're living in 2025. But assumption number one is that we are living in the last days. I've watched several videos over the last few weeks, and video after video after video says, folks, listen, the Bible says that in the last days the following things would happen. And then they start pointing out, for instance, wars, rumors of wars. And they just go, look around, folks. There are just all sorts of wars and rumors of wars going on in our day. That must prove that we're in the last days. I was in a correspondence just recently with a guy on Facebook, and he said, there has never been a time like we're seeing today in regard to earthquakes, in regard to wars and rumors of wars. Well, with all kindness and with all respect, I responded to that gentleman, you really don't know what you're talking about. To suggest that there were not real wars and rumors of wars, to suggest that we've never seen a time of so many earthquakes. Folks, do you realize that the National Geological Society has addressed this issue down through the years, and they pointed out that the reason we believe, or some people believe, that there are more earthquakes today than ever been is because we've got better reporting. We've got some of the most sensitive equipment that the world has ever seen. It doesn't mean that there are more earthquakes. It simply means that we have a better way of determining them and knowing that they've happened. The Geological Survey of America has actually refuted the claim that we're seeing more earthquakes in these days than has ever been witnessed. Period. So the assumptions start with, we must be in the last days. But wait a minute. In Acts chapter 2, Peter, standing up with the other 11 apostles who have been accused of speaking while drunken, Peter says, you men of Israel, hear my words and hearken unto me. These men are not drunken as you suppose, seeing it's but the third hour of the day. But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel, saying, it shall come to pass in the last days, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. I will show signs in the heaven above and in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke, before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. Now listen to me very carefully. Joel foretold the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the last days, right? It's irrefutable. Peter, on the day of Pentecost, 2,000 years ago, was the recipient of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in this fantastic, miraculous way. And he said, this is that which Joel predicted. Listen, Thomas Ice, with whom I've had 4 debates down through the years, actually affirmed, along with a man by the name of Arnold Fruchtenbaum, whom Thomas Ice quotes frequently. But Arnold Fruchtenbaum and Thomas Ice both say, no, what happened on Pentecost absolutely was not what Joel predicted. Now, wait a minute. Just hang on here a minute. Peter said, this is that. You know what Thomas Ice actually claimed on one occasion? Thomas Ice actually claimed what Peter actually said was, this is like that, which shall occur in the last days. And he claimed Peter was not saying that Joel was being fulfilled. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that is as false as a $13 bill. It is patently false. The original Greek does not support this is like that. Peter could have used, if he wanted to say this is like it will be, he could have said hontropon, homoios, hoia. Hoia is not really like as it is, a comparative term, but nonetheless, he could have said something totally different, but he said, this is that. Now, wait a minute, folks. Just hang on here. Since Peter said, this is that which Joel predicted, then we're not waiting for Joel to be fulfilled. And that means we're not waiting on the last days. And it means we're not in the last days. Do you realize that the New Testament writers, along with Peter, Acts chapter 2, who said this is that, in Acts chapter 3, he said all the prophets who have ever spoken have foretold these days. Those were his days 2,000 years ago. That same writer says in 1 Peter chapter 1, 18 to 20, Christ has been manifest in these last times. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past by the fathers, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son. That was 2,000 years ago. It is absolutely inaccurate, ladies and gentlemen. And it's simply hermeneutically wrong to say, well, yeah, the last days began in the first century and we're still in the last days. Last days doesn't mean 2,000 years. Second assumption. The assumption goes something like this. Jesus, standing in the temple, said to the Jews, your house is left to you desolate, which was a prediction, therefore, of the dismantling and demolition of the temple. As they left the temple, the apostles turned to Jesus and they began to show him the magnificent beauty and the size and the glory of the temple and the stones of the temple. And he said, do you not see all of these things? The hour is coming in which not one stone shall be left standing on top of another. The apostles were absolutely shocked. They were stunned. Not that they did not believe that the temple was to be destroyed in the last days. What they were shocked at was that Jesus was essentially telling them, and he did say this, that it was supposed to be in their generation. Because he said, when you see, And then in verse 34, all of these things will come upon this generation. So as Jesus made the prediction about the dissolution of the temple, the apostles turned to him and said, Lord, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming, your parousia, and the end of the age? Second assumption. It is assumed that when the apostles asked about Jesus' parousia, they were asking about Jesus' coming out of heaven, riding on a literal physical cloud as a literal physical 5'5" Jewish man. Well, since Jesus hasn't come out of heaven, literally, visibly, physically, then that passage hasn't been fulfilled. Therefore, we're still waiting for it. Second assumption, part 2. They assume, you got to listen to this. They assume that the apostles were just grossly ignorant, that they were confused, because they wrongly assumed that temple could not be destroyed unless it was at the end of the world, the end of human history. Listen, even John Calvin, commenting on Matthew chapter 24, verse 3, and the apostles' questions, John Calvin said the apostles absolutely could not imagine that temple could be destroyed, dismantled, demolished, unless it was at the end of time. When I read John Calvin's comments, I was literally like, really? Seriously? That's supposed to be an argument? Let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you'll consider this. Were the apostles aware that Solomon's temple, dedicated in 1 Kings chapter 7 and chapter 8, were they aware that temple was utterly, totally destroyed in BC 586? Did they know that? Were the apostles aware that event was called the Day of the Lord, the book of Zephaniah, the book of Jeremiah, other Old Testament books as well? Yes, they were. The apostles knew, and by the way, in Zechariah chapter 8, we find record the Jews actually had 3 fast days to commemorate the different periods of the siege of Jerusalem, beginning in 606 BC, 606, 597, 586. But they had 3 separate fast days to commemorate that destruction in 586. So when John Calvin said, the apostles just could not imagine that Jerusalem temple being destroyed unless it was the end of time. Well, did the apostles believe that the end of time came in 586 BC? Clearly not. Did they have to believe that the destruction of the temple meant the end of human history? Well, pretty clearly not. Judah and Jerusalem were carried off into Babylonian captivity. Now, it was certainly the end of their social order, but it wasn't the end of human history. So, assumption number 1, dispensationalists assume that we're in the last days today. Assumption number 2, they believe that when the apostles asked about a sign for Jesus' parousia, they had in mind a literal, visible, bodily coming of Christ out of heaven. And assumption number 3, they had to believe that temple and its destruction would only occur at the time of Jesus' descent out of heaven as a 5'5" Jewish man at the end of human history. Folks, here's something you have to understand. And by the way, We're talking about the last days. I've written a book, The Last Days Identified. I examine every major biblical text that talks about the last days. And I prove beyond refutation that the term the last days, when it is speaking eschatologically, refers to the last days, not the last days of time, not the last days of the Christian age, not the last days of human history, but the last days of Old Covenant Israel. That age ended in AD 70. I also have written this book, Watching for the Parousia, where Jesus' apostles confused or just simply wrong. Now, listen. If the apostles were right to link the coming of the Lord with the fall of Jerusalem, which occurred in AD 70, then all three futurist views of eschatology, all views of a future man of sin, all future views that we are in the last days, all future views that we're waiting for a rebuilt Jerusalem temple, all futurist views and claims that we're waiting on the Great Tribulation, all futurist views that we're waiting for the second coming, every one of those views is wrong if the apostles were correct and right to link the day of the Lord with the AD 70 judgment of Jerusalem. Why is that? Well, here's the fact, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, I document it in this book, Watching for the Parousia, where Jesus' apostles confused. Here's the point. This is incredible, and this is what is being missed by all three futurist views. And that is this. In the Old Testament, we have one example after another of predictions of the fall of Jerusalem that happened in 586 BC. Did you catch that? Okay? Passage after passage that predicted the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC, the 6th generation or the 6th century BC. And in one passage after another, that event, that 6th century destruction of Jerusalem, was called the Day of the Lord. It was called His coming in His presence. You know, kind of like parousia or parousia, if you please. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me say this again. The apostles knew all of this. The apostles knew Jerusalem had been destroyed in 586 BC. They knew without any doubt whatsoever that that event did not put an end to human history. They knew that event was called the Day of the Lord. So ask yourself the question. When we come to Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3, and we see Jesus predicting the destruction of Jerusalem, upon what logical basis must we assume that the apostles had an end of human history, literal, physical, bodily, visible coming of Christ out of heaven in mind? Upon what basis? Hermeneutically, historically, exegetically, upon what basis do we say, you know what? The apostles had the rapture in mind. They had the man of sin in mind. All future, 2,000 years in the future from them. They had the Great Tribulation. They had a second and a third, a third and a fourth temple in mind. And then they had the end of human history in mind, because they had the Christian age in mind as the last days. Folks, I'm sorry. That does not compute. So here are three major assumptions that are related to the doctrine of the man of sin, that are related to the Messianic temple, that are related to the red heifer, that are related to eschatology as a whole. And all three of those basic assumptions are absolutely false. Folks, we're not waiting for the rapture. We're not waiting for the man of sin, and Donald Trump is not the man of sin. We're not waiting for the rebuilding of a third or a fourth temple in Jerusalem. We're not waiting for the reinstitution of the animal sacrifices. We're not waiting for a perfect red heifer. We are not waiting for the establishment of a literal, physical, nationalistic, quasi-military kingdom on earth. We're not waiting for a literal millennial reign on earth. Do yourself a huge, huge favor. Go to my website and order these two books. Now listen, if you go to my website and if you order these two books and you send me a note that says, "Hey Don, I saw your offer on your Friday morning responding to the critics about the man of sin," I'll refund the total shipping. Okay? That's going to save you a good bit of money. Okay? So again, do yourself a favor. Learn without a doubt. We are not in the last days. Learn without a doubt. The apostles understood that the day of the Lord was to be at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. You know what? This is all really good news. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week.